The Galactic Council chamber on Bureaucracy Prime was as always a monument to self-importance and bad interior design. Picture a circular room the size of a football stadium, filled with floating platforms where the galaxy's most pompous beings gathered to make decisions that would inevitably backfire spectacularly. Today was no exception. Ambassador Quilbert the Pretentious, a 7-foot-tall bird-like creature with feathers that changed colors based on his emotional state, currently a nauseating shade of self-righteous purple, stood at the central podium. His voice carried that particular tone of someone who had never been punched in the face but desperately needed to be. Esteemed colleagues, Quilbert began, ruffling his plumage dramatically, we are gathered here today to address the most pressing threat to galactic civilization since the Great Bureaucratic Revolution of 2847. He paused for effect, which was completely wasted on an audience that had the collective attention span of caffeinated squirrels. Humanity, he continued, his voice dripping with disdain, has committed crimes against galactic decency that can no longer be ignored. Councillor Blorkenheimer, a slug-like being approximately the size and intelligence of a filing cabinet, raised one of his many tentacles. What crimes specifically, Ambassador? I missed the last 17 briefings due to my mandatory slime maintenance schedule. Quilbert's feathers shifted to an indignant orange. Allow me to enumerate their transgressions, Counselor. First, they weaponized coffee. Do you understand what that means? They took a harmless plant beverage and turned it into a productivity-enhancing drug that has corrupted half the galaxy's workforce. Our economic projections are meaningless because nobody can predict when humans will introduce another addictive substance disguised as refreshment. Murmurs of concern rippled through the chamber, mostly from species that had recently discovered espresso. Second, Quilbert continued, they introduced the concept of reality television to 47 different civilizations, causing a 30% drop in galactic IQ scores and an unprecedented rise in voluntary sterilization rates. The Zephyrian Empire collapsed entirely after their population became obsessed with a show called Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Their entire military structure imploded when generals started demanding personal camera crews. Councillor Vrexnock, who resembled a cross between a praying mantis and a tax auditor, clicked his mandibles disapprovingly. The humans also taught my people about something called memes. My youngest offspring now communicates exclusively in what he calls dank formats. I have not understood a word he has said in 6 months. And finally, Quilbert announced with the gravity of someone revealing a galactic conspiracy, they introduced the phrase hold my beer to 17 warrior cultures. Do you have any idea what happens when you tell a Klingon to hold your beer? The casualty reports alone crashed our insurance systems. The chamber erupted in various forms of alien outrage. Tentacles waved, appendages gestured wildly, and several species made sounds that could charitably be described as deeply concerned wheezing. Quilbert raised his wings for silence. Therefore I propose we exile the entire human species from our galaxy. Let them take their coffee, their reality shows and their inexplicable ability to turn any situation into an excuse for violence to some other corner of the universe where they can corrupt someone else's civilization. The vote was swift and unanimous, mostly because half the council members had stopped paying attention and just voted with whatever the previous speaker had said. Democracy in action, ladies and gentlemen. Blorkenheimer, who had been selected for the task primarily because everyone else was smart enough to volunteer him instead of themselves, was assigned to deliver the official exile notice to Earth. As he slowly oozed toward his transport ship, he couldn't help but feel that this was going to be the easiest diplomatic mission of his career. After all, what could a bunch of primitive humans possibly do when faced with the united decision of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy? They would probably beg, plead, maybe offer to give up coffee in exchange for mercy. Blorkenheimer had handled dozens of similar situations. Compliance was always inevitable when faced with overwhelming bureaucratic authority. He had absolutely no idea that humanity had been listening to every word of the council meeting through a combination of hacked communication systems and strategically placed listening devices. Earth's intelligence network made the Galactic Council's security look like a screen door on a submarine. More importantly, he had no idea that humanity's response to the exile vote was not going to be the desperate pleading he expected, but rather something much more terrifying to a career bureaucrat: enthusiasm. Blorkenheimer's ship approached Earth with all the speed and grace of a bureaucratic process, which is to say it took 3 times longer than necessary, and involved several unnecessary forms. When he finally arrived at the United Nations headquarters in New York, he was expecting to find a scene of panic, desperation, and possibly some light weeping. Instead, he found General Martinez sitting behind a desk, drinking what appeared to be coffee, and looking absolutely delighted. "Ah, Councillor Blorkenheimer," Martinez said, not bothering to stand up or show any of the appropriate deference that galactic protocol demanded. "Right on time. Coffee? I just made a fresh pot." Blorkenheimer's multiple eye stalks blinked in confusion. This was not going according to script. Where was the fear? The begging? The desperate offers to reform human behavior? General Martinez, I am here to deliver the official notification of Earth's exile from the Galactic Council effective immediately. Your species has been deemed a threat to galactic stability and must vacate all Council territories within standard galactic year. Martinez took a long, deliberately slow sip of his coffee and smiled. Oh, that's fantastic news. Really, thank you for making the trip all the way out here to tell us in person. Very considerate. What? Blorkenheimer's slug-like body contracted in confusion. Perhaps you did not understand. You are being exiled. Banished. Cast out. This is typically considered a bad thing. Oh no, I understood perfectly, Martinez replied, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who had been planning for this exact moment. In fact, we've been expecting this conversation for about 6 months now. Your council's communication security is, and I'm being diplomatic here, absolutely terrible. My 12-year-old nephew could hack your supposedly encrypted channels using a calculator and a really strong opinion. Blorkenheimer's eye stalks drooped. You knew. Counselor, we've been listening to your meetings since the day humanity joined the galactic community. Did you really think a species that invented internet trolling wouldn't figure out how to eavesdrop on pompous bird aliens having temper tantrums in space? We heard Quilbert's little speech about coffee being a weapon. By the way, tell him we said thanks for the idea. We hadn't actually thought of weaponizing caffeine until he mentioned it. Very inspiring. The general opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder labeled Project Exodus in bold letters. See, the thing about humans, Counselor, is that we're really good at contingency planning. Some people call it paranoia. We call it Tuesday. The moment we joined your little galactic club, we started planning for the day you'd inevitably decide we were too much trouble to keep around. Blorkenheimer stared at the folder like it contained the secrets of the universe, which in a way, it did. What is Project Exodus? Martinez grinned, and it was the kind of grin that made smart people very nervous. It's our exit strategy, Counselor. You see, when humanity realized that the Galactic Council was essentially a cosmic homeowners association run by the kind of people who complain about lawn height, we started preparing for our eventual departure. We've been building ships, mapping unexplored space, and stockpiling everything we'd need to not just survive outside Council territory, but to thrive. But where will you go? The galaxy is vast, but Council territory encompasses most of the civilized regions. You'll be alone in the void. Oh, Counselor, Martinez said, his grin widening. That's the beautiful part. We're not staying in this galaxy at all. Why would we limit ourselves to the same neighborhood as people who think coffee is a weapon of mass destruction? We've found some lovely real estate in Andromeda, better schools, lower crime rates, and absolutely zero pompous bird aliens. Blorkenheimer felt what could charitably be described as the slug equivalent of a panic attack. You can't leave the galaxy. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would bankrupt most civilizations. Martinez chuckled, and took another sip of his coffee. Counselor, humanity figured out how to split atoms for fun and built rockets to reach the moon because we were bored on a Tuesday. Did you really think intergalactic travel would slow us down? We've had faster-than-light technology that makes your council ships look like they're powered by hamster wheels and wishful thinking. The general stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling city below. In fact, the first wave of colony ships launches tomorrow. We're calling it the Great Human Exodus, and honestly, we couldn't be more excited. No more council meetings, no more galactic bureaucracy, no more having to pretend that Quilbert's opinions matter to anyone except Quilbert. Blorkenheimer's voice was barely above a whisper. The first wave. Oh yes, we're doing this properly. 40,000 ships in the first wave alone, each one carrying about 10,000 humans plus everything we need to establish new civilizations. We're taking our coffee, our reality TV, our memes, and yes, our tendency to say hold my beer before doing spectacularly dangerous things. We're going to introduce all of it to brand new galaxies full of civilizations who haven't learned to be boring yet. Martinez turned back to the counselor with that same terrifying grin. You wanted us gone, Counselor Blorkenheimer. Congratulations. You're getting exactly what you asked for. I do hope the Galactic Council enjoys the peace and quiet. Captain Nova Reeves stood on the bridge of the flagship Inevitable Consequence, watching the most organized chaos in human history unfold through the panoramic view screen. 40,000 ships stretched across Earth's orbital space like a constellation of defiance, each one representing humanity's collective decision to turn exile into adventure. As the fleet's commanding officer, Nova had seen a lot of impressive sights in her career, but this was something special. "Status report," she called out, not because she needed one, but because she enjoyed the sound of controlled pandemonium that followed. "Captain, the civilian transport Murphy's Law reports they're having difficulty with their cargo bay doors," announced Lieutenant Commander Phillips from the communications station. "Apparently, someone tried to load a full-sized replica of the Statue of Liberty." "Tell them to leave it," Nova replied without missing a beat. "We'll build a better one in Andromeda." Next, the science vessel Questionable Decisions has successfully loaded their entire collection of cat videos onto quantum storage drives. Dr. Vasquez reports that preserving internet culture for future generations is, and I quote, "more important than oxygen recycling systems." Nova grinned. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the kind of brilliant scientist who could solve faster-than-light travel in her sleep but considered proper filing systems to be an affront to human creativity. She was also completely right about the cat videos. The military transport overwhelming responses has finished loading their cargo, Phillips continued. General Thompson reports that they've managed to pack enough firepower to pacify 3 galaxies, plus emergency supplies of hot sauce and barbecue sauce for diplomatic situations. And the food production ships, pizza recipe preservation is at 100%, Captain. We've also successfully loaded the complete genetic database for coffee plants, chocolate, and something called ranch dressing that apparently half the fleet considers essential for survival. Nova watched as another wave of ships began their departure sequence. The beauty of human logistics was that it looked like complete chaos to outsiders, but every seemingly random action was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. They had been preparing for this moment for years, and it showed. "Captain," called out Dr. Vasquez from the science station, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who had just discovered something fascinating and slightly terrifying. "I'm reading some interesting energy signatures from the Galactic Council monitoring stations. They're trying to track our departure vectors." "Let me guess," Nova said, settling into her command chair with the confidence of someone who had anticipated this exact scenario. "They want to know where we're going so they can file a complaint with the Intergalactic Bureau of We Don't Care What You Think." "Actually, Captain, I think they're starting to realize what 40,000 human ships leaving simultaneously actually means for their economy. Coffee futures alone are down 30%, and we haven't even cleared the solar system yet." Through the view screen, Nova could see the smaller personal vessels beginning their journey. These weren't military ships or massive colony transports. These were families, entrepreneurs, artists, and the kind of humans who heard impossible journey to unknown galaxy and thought sounds like Tuesday. Each ship carried not just people and supplies, but the entire accumulated knowledge and culture of human civilization. "Dr. Vasquez," Nova said, "remind me again why our faster-than-light drives are better than the Council's standard technology." "Well, Captain, their drives are based on careful calculations, safety protocols, and what they consider reasonable energy expenditure," Vasquez replied, her voice dripping with the kind of scientific disdain reserved for people who thought safety manuals were suggestions. "Our drives are based on the human principle of what's the worst that could happen, combined with enough raw power to punch holes in reality itself. And the safety testing, we tested it once. It worked. That's more testing than humanity usually does before deciding something is a good idea." Nova laughed, because Dr. Vasquez was absolutely right. Humanity's approach to scientific advancement had always been build it first, figure out why it works later, and add safety features if we remember. It had gotten them to the moon, through 2 world wars, and now to the point where they could casually relocate their entire species to another galaxy because the neighbors complained about the noise. "Captain, incoming transmission from Earth," Phillips announced. "It's General Martinez." "Put him through." Martinez's voice filled the bridge with the calm authority of someone who had just watched his species flip off an entire galactic government. "Nova, you have a go for full departure. The last of the civilian transports have cleared Earth's atmosphere. How are you feeling about making history?" "General, I'm feeling like humanity just proved that the best response to 'you can't sit with us' is to find a better table," Nova replied. "Also, I'm getting reports that several alien species are trying to hitch rides on our ships. Any particular species, the Zephyrians are offering to trade their entire royal treasury for passage to Andromeda. Apparently, after their civilization collapsed due to reality TV addiction, they've decided that humans are the most interesting species in the galaxy, and they want to see what we do next." Martinez chuckled. "Tell them we'll think about it. What about the Council monitoring stations?" Dr. Vasquez spoke up from her station. "General, they're not just monitoring us anymore. They're trying to scan our drive systems. I think they're finally realizing that humans didn't just build faster ships, we built better ships. Our technology is making their entire fleet look like they're traveling through space, using rubber bands and good intentions. Any concerns about them trying to stop us?" Nova looked out at the vast formation of human ships, each one representing decades of secret preparation and the collective stubbornness of an entire species. "General, they're welcome to try. But I think they're starting to understand that the same species that weaponized coffee and turned reality TV into a galactic crisis might have a few more surprises up their sleeves." "Copy that, Captain. Take us to the stars." "And Nova?" "Yes, General. Make sure the first message we send back to the Council is a postcard. Something cheerful, maybe a picture of our new galactic empire with 'Wish you were here' written on the back." Nova grinned as the last of Earth's ships engaged their drives and disappeared into the void, leaving behind a galaxy that was about to learn the difference between getting rid of a problem and creating a much bigger one somewhere else. 6 months after the Great Human Exodus, Captain Nova Reeves stood in the command center of New Manhattan Station, orbiting a planet humans had cheerfully renamed Second Earth in the Andromeda Galaxy. The view outside showed a sight that would have given the Galactic Council collective heart attacks, a thriving human civilization that had not only survived their exile, but had turned it into the galaxy's most successful expansion project in recorded history. "Captain," announced Communications Officer Chen, barely containing her excitement, "we're receiving another request for membership in the Human Galactic Cooperative. This time it's from the Crystalline Hegemony. They're offering to restructure their entire government system if we'll teach them about something called democratic voting with pizza parties." Nova sipped her coffee, which had been voted the official beverage of 3-star systems and was now considered currency in 4 others. "Tell them we'll send a diplomatic team next Tuesday. Make sure Commander Thompson is available. He's been looking for an excuse to explain democracy using interpretive dance again." The Human Galactic Cooperative hadn't been planned, exactly. It had happened the way most human achievements happened, accidentally, enthusiastically, and with results that exceeded everyone's expectations by several orders of magnitude. Within 2 months of arriving in Andromeda, humans had encountered 17 different alien civilizations, defeated 3 hostile empires through a combination of superior technology and creative profanity, and somehow convinced 14 species to join what was essentially a galactic democracy, run by people who still argued about pineapple on pizza. "Status report on the trade routes?" Nova asked, though she already knew the answer would be somewhere between incredibly successful and completely ridiculous. "Captain, the Zephyrian refugees have established a coffee trade network that spans 47 star systems," Chen replied, consulting her tablet. "They're calling it the Caffeinated Liberation Front, and they've successfully convinced the robotic consortium that emotions are a small price to pay for proper espresso." Nova nodded approvingly. The Zephyrians, refugees from their reality TV-induced civilization collapse, had turned out to be natural entrepreneurs once they discovered that humans treated failure as a learning experience, rather than a career-ending catastrophe. They'd become humanity's most enthusiastic partners in what Dr. Vasquez had termed aggressive cultural exchange. "And the theme parks, the Tau Ceti Entertainment Complex is booked solid for the next 6 months, Captain." Apparently, the concept of fun was completely foreign to most Andromedan species until humans introduced roller coasters, video games, and something called extreme miniature golf. The Insectoid Collective has declared the bumper cars to be the greatest military training simulation ever devised. Nova laughed, remembering the diplomatic incident when the insectoids had first encountered bumper cars. It had taken 3 hours to convince them that deliberate vehicle collisions were meant to be enjoyable rather than acts of war. Now they had a standing reservation every weekend, and had started designing their own combat vehicles based on bumper car principles. "Captain, incoming priority transmission from the Milky Way," Chen announced, her voice taking on the formal tone reserved for potentially historic moments. "It's the Galactic Council. They're requesting immediate communication with human leadership." "Put them through to the main screen," Nova said, settling into her command chair with the anticipation of someone about to watch a particularly entertaining disaster unfold. The screen flickered to life, revealing the familiar figure of Ambassador Quilbert, whose feathers had shifted to what could only be described as panic yellows with undertones of existential dread. Behind him, Nova could see the Galactic Council chamber, looking notably emptier than usual. "Captain Reeves," Quilbert began, his voice carrying the strained politeness of someone trying to negotiate with a natural disaster, "I trust you are well. We have been monitoring your activities in the Andromeda Galaxy." "Ambassador Quilbert," Nova replied, with the cheerful tone of someone who held all the cards and was enjoying every minute of it. "How lovely to hear from you. I hope you're enjoying the peace and quiet now that all the troublesome humans are gone." Quilbert's feathers twitched. "Yes, well, about that. It has come to our attention that your departure has had some unexpected consequences." Oh, you mean the complete collapse of your coffee market? Or the fact that 17 species have formally requested to leave Council territory to join our human galactic cooperative? Or perhaps you're referring to the economic crisis caused by the sudden absence of human entertainment products. The ambassador's feathers had now shifted to a shade of yellow so bright it was practically fluorescent. Captain, we may have acted hastily in our decision to exile humanity. Perhaps we can discuss terms for your return to Council space. Nova leaned back in her chair, savoring this moment like a fine wine. Ambassador, that's very kind of you to offer, but I'm afraid we're quite busy establishing our new galactic empire. Commander Thompson has been particularly successful in his diplomatic missions. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Commander Jake Thompson's voice crackled over the communications system from the nearby planet where he was conducting what he called aggressive negotiations with a recently discovered alien military alliance. Captain, I've got some great news. Thompson's voice carried the enthusiasm of someone who had just solved a complex problem using the time-honored human method of overwhelming firepower and superior snack foods. The Andromedan Defense Pact has agreed to peaceful coexistence after I introduced them to barbecue sauce and explained the concept of mutually assured destructions using a children's board game. Apparently, Risk is considered a masterwork of strategic thinking in this galaxy. Outstanding, Commander. Any casualties? Just their previous understanding of tactical planning, Captain. Oh, and they want to trade their entire military technology database for the recipe for buffalo wings. I told them I'd have to run it by you first, but honestly, I think buffalo wings might be too powerful for them. They're already calling barbecue sauce the substance of the gods. Nova could see Quilbert's feathers practically vibrating with what she assumed was a mixture of terror and fascination. Ambassador, as you can hear, we're keeping quite busy out here. Commander Thompson has successfully negotiated peace treaties with hostile alien empires using condiments and board games. Dr. Vasquez has established research facilities that are advancing science at a rate that's making your council universities look like they're teaching with stone tablets. And our entertainment industry has introduced the concept of fun to 17 different species. Captain Reeves, Quilbert said, his voice carrying the desperation of someone watching their entire worldview collapse in real time, surely we can reach some accommodation. The Galactic Council is prepared to offer humanity full reinstatement, representation on the High Council, and favorable trade agreements. Nova pretended to consider this for a moment, though she had already decided her answer months ago. Ambassador, that's a very generous offer, but I'm afraid we'll have to decline. You see, we've discovered something wonderful out here in Andromeda. We've found civilizations that appreciate creativity, embrace change, and don't consider coffee to be a weapon of mass destruction. We've built a society based on cooperation, innovation, and the radical idea that different species can work together without endless bureaucracy. She paused, to take another sip of her coffee, letting the silence stretch until she could practically hear Quilbert's feathers rustling with anxiety. Plus, Ambassador, we're having far too much fun building our own galactic empire to come back and play by your rules. But thank you for the exile, it was exactly the motivation we needed to find something better. The transmission ended with Quilbert's feathers shifting to a shade of blue that Nova was pretty sure indicated complete bureaucratic breakdown. She turned to her crew, all of whom were grinning with the satisfaction of people who had just witnessed history being made. Well, team, Nova said, raising her coffee mug in a toast, I think it's safe to say that humanity's exile is working out exactly as planned. Now, who wants to help me design our response to the crystalline hegemony's application for membership? I'm thinking we should include a welcome package with pizza recipes and a beginner's guide to democratic voting. Outside the viewports, the lights of human ships and stations stretched across the Andromeda galaxy like stars, each one representing humanity's refusal to be limited by someone else's definition of what was possible. The Exile had become an empire, and the empire was just getting started. The Galactic Council Chamber on Bureaucracy Prime had seen better days. Much better days. The magnificent circular room that had once housed the galaxy's most self-important beings now resembled the aftermath of a very expensive, very poorly planned disaster. Half the floating platforms were empty, their former occupants having either fled to join humanity's galactic cooperative or locked themselves in their home systems to await the inevitable economic collapse. Ambassador Quilbert stood at the central podium, his feathers cycling through colors that didn't exist in nature and probably shouldn't exist anywhere. He had called this emergency session after receiving 17 formal declarations of withdrawal from Council territory, 43 applications to join the Human Galactic Cooperative, and one particularly insulting message from the Zephyrian refugees that simply read, "Thanks for the push. Best decision we never made. P.S. Human coffee is amazing. Esteemed colleagues," Quilbert began, though esteemed was becoming increasingly relative and colleagues was being generous, "we face the greatest crisis in galactic history. The human exile has not proceeded according to our projections. Councillor Blorkenheimer, who had been conspicuously absent from recent meetings due to what he called stress-induced slime production, oozed forward on his platform with the enthusiasm of someone attending their own funeral. Ambassador, perhaps you could define not according to projections for those of us who have been hiding in our offices pretending this wasn't happening. Quilbert's feathers shifted to a shade of red that suggested imminent nervous breakdown. Counselor, 6 months ago we exiled humanity to rid ourselves of their disruptive influence. Instead they have established what can only be described as a galactic empire that makes our council look like a children's debate club run by particularly incompetent children. The few remaining council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, appendages, or whatever they used for sitting. Councillor Vrexnock, whose people had recently suffered massive economic losses due to the coffee shortage, clicked his mandibles in what passed for desperation among his species. The situation reports are troubling, Vrexnock admitted, consulting a tablet that looked like it had been through several wars. Human coffee production in Andromeda has exceeded all galactic demand projections. They're not just self-sufficient, they're exporting to civilizations we've never even heard of. My people are paying black market prices for coffee beans that humans are practically giving away to their new allies. It gets worse, announced Councillor Thexera, a crystalline being whose usual prismatic glow had dimmed to what could charitably be called existential crisis gray. The entertainment crisis has reached critical levels. Without human television programming, 14 species have reported significant increases in productivity, which sounds positive until you realize they're using that productivity to build better military technology because they're bored out of their minds. Quilbert felt what he was pretty sure was the avian equivalent of a migraine coming on. Continue your report, Counselor. The Klingon Empire has declared war on 3 neighboring systems purely for entertainment purposes. They claim that without human sports programming, ritualized combat is the only remaining source of drama in their lives. They're calling it the Great Boredom War, and they've invited other species to join for what they describe as the authentic excitement experience. Blorkenheimer made a sound that could have been laughter or crying. It was hard to tell with slug-like beings. Ambassador, we may have underestimated the humans' role in galactic stability. They weren't just disruptive. They were apparently the only thing preventing widespread interstellar warfare caused by chronic understimulation. The chamber's communication system suddenly crackled to life, interrupting what was shaping up to be a very therapeutic group panic session. Attention Galactic Council. This is General Martinez of the Human Galactic Cooperative. We're receiving some interesting communications from your territory. Is everything all right over there? Quilbert looked around the nearly empty chamber, at the economic reports showing cascading system failures, at the military intelligence briefings describing civilizations going to war out of sheer boredom, and at Blorkenheimer, who appeared to be having what could charitably be described as a complete nervous breakdown. General Martinez, Quilbert said, his voice carrying the strained politeness of someone who had just realized they were negotiating from a position of complete powerlessness. Thank you for your concern. We are experiencing some minor adjustments following your species' departure. Martinez's laughter echoed through the chamber with the warmth of someone watching karma work with unusual efficiency. Minor adjustments. Ambassador, we're getting refugee applications from half your member species. The other half are apparently going to war because they miss our reality TV shows. I'm not sure I'd call that minor. General, perhaps we could discuss the possibility of renewed diplomatic relations, Quilbert said, though every word felt like admitting defeat in the most public way possible. The Council has been reconsidering some of our previous decisions. Oh, you mean the decision to exile us because we made coffee too interesting and taught people that entertainment doesn't have to be boring? That decision. Quilbert's feathers were now cycling through colors so rapidly they were creating a small light show. Yes, that decision. We may have been hasty. Tell you what, Ambassador, Martinez said, his tone carrying the casual authority of someone who held all the cards and was enjoying the game. I'm going to send Councillor Blorkenheimer a care package. Some coffee, a selection of our finest reality TV programming, and maybe a cookbook. Consider it a goodwill gesture between former neighbors. That's very generous, General. But what we really need to discuss are terms for humanity's return to Council space. We're prepared to offer significant concessions. The silence that followed was long enough for Blorkenheimer to ooze completely off his platform and begin what appeared to be an attempt to hide under the furniture. Ambassador, Martinez finally said, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining something to a particularly slow child. I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We don't want to come back. We're not interested in your concessions. We've built something better out here, and frankly we're having too much fun to even consider returning to the galaxy that exiled us for being too creative. Quilbert felt something inside him that might have been the last of his diplomatic composure finally snap. General, you cannot simply ignore the established galactic order. There are protocols, procedures, centuries of precedent. Ambassador, we're humans. We've been ignoring established orders since we figured out fire was more useful than following safety regulations. Besides, your established galactic order is currently falling apart because you exiled the only species that knew how to make coffee and television shows. I'm not sure your precedents are worth much right now. The transmission continued with Martinez delivering what could only be described as the most polite, thorough, and devastating diplomatic rejection in galactic history. He explained, in detail, how humanity's exile had freed them to build a better society, establish more effective trade networks, and create entertainment that didn't put entire civilizations to sleep. But General, Quilbert tried one last time, his voice carrying the desperation of someone watching their entire worldview collapse in real time. Surely we can reach some accommodation. What would it take for humanity to consider rejoining galactic civilization? Martinez paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone delivering an ultimatum. Ambassador, if the Galactic Council wants to be part of human civilization, they're welcome to apply for membership in our cooperative. We'll consider your application along with all the others. Fair warning though, the process involves democratic voting, transparent government, and a basic competency test that includes making coffee and understanding why entertainment should be entertaining. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in complete silence, except for the sound of Blorkenheimer attempting to achieve complete invisibility through aggressive sliming. Quilbert looked around at the empty platforms, the economic disaster reports, and the growing stack of applications to join humanity's galactic empire. For the first time in his political career, he found himself considering the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the Galactic Council had made the single worst decision in the history of interstellar relations. Councillor Blorkenheimer, he said finally, addressing the quivering mass of bureaucratic despair that had once been his colleague. I believe it's time we discuss submitting an application to join the Human Galactic Cooperative. The sound Blorkenheimer made in response was somewhere between relief and the realization that sometimes the best way to avoid being defeated by your enemies is to join them before they remember that you were enemies in the first place. 2 years after what historians would later call the Great Human Exodus, and economists would refer to as the day everything got better, the former Galactic Council chamber on Bureaucracy Prime had been converted into something that would have given the original council members collective heart attacks, a functioning democratic assembly where beings actually got things done. The circular chamber still maintained its impressive architecture, but the floating platforms had been replaced with comfortable seating arrangements, designed for beings of various anatomical configurations. Coffee dispensers had been installed at regular intervals, along with what appeared to be a full-service snack bar offering something called diplomatic pizza and 47 different flavor profiles to accommodate various alien digestive systems. At the central podium, now renamed the speaker's platform for beings who actually have something useful to say, stood General Martinez. He wore casual military dress, and the kind of relaxed confidence that came from turning a galactic exile into the most successful political reorganization in recorded history. Behind him, a banner reading Human Galactic Cooperative, where democracy meets common sense hung where the old council seal used to be. Ladies, gentlemen, beings of various and unspecified gender configurations. Martinez began, addressing the packed assembly, with the easy authority of someone who had accidentally become the leader of a galactic superpower. Welcome to the second annual State of the Cooperative Address. I'm pleased to report that civilization is doing surprisingly well now that we've eliminated most of the bureaucracy. The audience, which included representatives from over 300 species across 2 galaxies, responded with what could charitably be described as enthusiastic approval expressed in 47 different languages and several forms of bioluminescent communication. First, let's address our membership applications. Martinez continued, consulting a tablet that looked suspiciously like it had been designed by someone who thought user manuals were for quitters. We've received formal applications from the former Galactic Council territories, including a particularly heartfelt submission from the Bureaucracy Prime Administrative Region, formerly known as the Galactic Council itself. In the front row, Ambassador Quilbert sat in what had once been the most prestigious seating in the galaxy, and was now just another chair in a democratically organized assembly. His feathers had settled into a permanent shade of what could only be described as resigned acceptance with undertones of "this is actually much better." Next to him, Councillor Blorkenheimer had achieved what appeared to be perfect contentment in his new role as Director of Interspecies Relations, a position that involved far less stress and much better coffee. Ambassador Quilbert, Martinez said, nodding toward the former council leader, how has the transition been going in your region? Quilbert stood, his posture carrying the dignity of someone who had learned to embrace dramatic irony. General Martinez, I am pleased to report that the former council territories have experienced unprecedented economic growth, a 78% reduction in interdepartmental warfare, and what our sociologists are calling the happiness phenomenons following the introduction of human entertainment programming and democratic voting procedures. Outstanding. And the coffee situation? Sir, coffee production has exceeded all projections. The Zephyrian refugee communities have established what they're calling the Caffeinated Liberation Network, which has successfully introduced proper coffee to 47 species that previously considered flavor to be a dangerous concept. We're also pleased to report that the phrase "hold my beers" has been successfully translated into 136 languages, though we're still working on explaining why it inevitably leads to either scientific breakthroughs or property damage. Martinez grinned, because the phrase "hold my beer" had become something of a diplomatic tool in the cooperative. It served as both a warning and a promise that whatever came next would be memorable, educational, and probably require insurance claims. Excellent. Now, let's hear from our entertainment division. Captain Reeves. Captain Nova Reeves, now bearing the official title of Director of Cultural Exchange and Recreational Chaos, stood from her seat in the former military advisory section. General, I'm pleased to report that our entertainment export program has achieved total success. The Andromedan entertainment complexes are booked solid for the next 3 years, and we've received requests to establish theme parks in 17 additional star systems. Any particular highlights? Sir, the Robotic Consortium has officially declared that roller coasters are the pinnacle of engineering achievement, and have requested permission to build a mechanized planet entirely dedicated to what they're calling optimal fun delivery systems. Also, the crystalline hegemony has discovered video games, and their entire civilization has reorganized itself around achieving high scores in something called Galactic Civilization V7. They're currently terraforming planets to match game scenarios. Martinez nodded approvingly. Human entertainment had proven to be more effective at promoting peace than centuries of diplomatic treaties. It was hard to wage war when you were too busy trying to beat your neighbor's score in intergalactic bowling. And our diplomatic corps, Commander Thompson, Commander Jake Thompson, whose official title was now Director of Aggressive Friendship and Culinary Diplomacy, stood with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered that his particular talents were perfectly suited for intergalactic relations. General, our diplomatic missions continue to exceed expectations. Last month, we successfully negotiated a trade agreement between two species that had been at war for 3 centuries by introducing them to barbecue sauce and explaining the concept of friendly competition using a game of capture the flag. Casualties. Just their previous understanding of conflict resolution, sir. They're now planning to settle all future disputes through competitive cooking. Also, I'm pleased to report that the Andromedan Defense Pact has officially adopted potluck diplomacies as their primary conflict resolution mechanism. Nothing says let's work together like sharing food and arguing about whose grandmother makes the best pie. Martinez looked out over the assembly, at beings from hundreds of worlds working together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under the old council system. The former Exile had become the foundation of something unprecedented, a galactic government that actually functioned because it was based on cooperation rather than bureaucracy, innovation rather than tradition, and the radical idea that different species could work together if they just had decent coffee and something entertaining to watch during breaks. Before we conclude today's session, Martinez said, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering a historic statement, I want to address something that's been on everyone's minds. 2 years ago, the Galactic Council voted to exile humanity because they considered us a threat to galactic stability. They were absolutely right. The chamber fell silent, various species tensing in preparation for what they assumed would be a dramatic revelation. We were a threat to their stability, Martinez continued, his grin widening, because their stability was based on stagnation, fear of change, and really terrible coffee. We've replaced that with a system based on progress, adaptation, and beverages that don't taste like they were filtered through a bureaucrat's soul. The assembly erupted in what could only be described as enthusiastic approval, expressed through applause, cheering, bioluminescent displays, and several forms of harmonic resonance that made the building vibrate in pleasing ways. The Galactic Council wanted us gone because we introduced concepts like efficiency, entertainment, and coffee that doesn't suck. They were afraid we'd disrupt their carefully maintained mediocrity. They were right about that too. We disrupted it so thoroughly that we replaced it with something better. Martinez paused, looking directly at the camera that was broadcasting this session to civilizations across 2 galaxies. So to anyone out there who's still wondering whether humanity's exile was a good idea, I want to say thank you. Thank you for giving us the motivation to build something better than what we left behind. Thank you for forcing us to prove that democracy, innovation, and decent coffee are more powerful than bureaucracy, tradition, and whatever it was you people were drinking. He raised his coffee mug in a toast that was simultaneously picked up by 300 species across the assembly. Here's to Exile, evolution, and the universal truth that sometimes the best response to "you can't sit with us" is to build a better table and invite everyone else to join you. In the back of the chamber, a small display screen showed a live feed from the Milky Way, where former Galactic Council territories were celebrating their second anniversary of joining the Human Galactic Cooperative. Coffee shops had replaced bureaucratic offices, entertainment centers had replaced administrative complexes, and democratic assemblies had replaced the endless committee meetings that had once passed for government. The Exile had become an empire. The outcasts had become leaders, and the galaxy had learned that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to let the problem solve itself somewhere else, and then ask very nicely if it would mind sharing the solution. Ambassador Quilbert, now serving his second term as the elected representative of the bureaucracy prime sector, reflected on the irony of the situation. The Galactic Council had exiled humanity to preserve galactic civilization. Instead, humanity had gone out and built a better one, then invited everyone else to join. It was, he had to admit, the most human thing possible, taking rejection as motivation, turning exile into opportunity, and somehow managing to make everyone involved better off in the process, even the people who had tried to get rid of them in the first place. The session concluded with the traditional closing ceremony, the simultaneous brewing of coffee in 300 different styles, the playing of the cooperative anthem, a surprisingly catchy song about democracy and decent beverages, and the daily reminder that civilization worked best when it was run by beings who understood that progress was more important than protocol, cooperation was more effective than control, and that really good coffee could solve more problems than 1,000 bureaucrats with their heads stuck in regulations. As the assembly dispersed, beings from across 2 galaxies heading back to their ships and stations and worlds, Martinez remained at the podium for a moment, savoring the view of functional interstellar democracy in action. The Galactic Council had voted to exile Earth because humanity was too disruptive. They had been absolutely, completely, and perfectly correct. Humanity had disrupted their entire concept of how civilization should work, and the result was better than anyone could have imagined. Sometimes, Martinez reflected, the greatest compliment your enemies can give you is trying to get rid of you because you're too effective at making things better. He finished his coffee, updated his notes for tomorrow's session on expanding democratic pizza distribution to the Outer Rim territories, and headed home to a galaxy that had learned to appreciate the fine art of turning problems into opportunities and exile into empire. After all, that's what humans did best, take whatever the universe threw at them and somehow manage to make it work better than it had any right to.